Hi, Shireen. Thank you so much for joining me. I thought that we could discuss a little bit about the history of Chemould. And this is obviously in regards to our series on legacy galleries. So we're really interested on the generational shifts through the trajectory of the gallery. And I'd like to start at the beginning, if I may, and just ask you just to take us through the initial motivations of Khorshed and Kekoo in opening a gallery, how it came about, and what their backgrounds were, their relationship to art at the outset.
Well, I think this is a story well told, and it's been repeated. But I guess there's always new audiences, and thank you for bringing In Touch into this kind of realm of legacy kind of interviews that you've taken on. Basically, my father came back from England, and his father and grandfather were in tobacco. And he somehow, I can't see that he would ever join that family business, but this is way back in the 40s when he met a gentleman called Roger Van Dam, and a Belgian who had already had a molding, sorry, not framing, it was molding, wooden molding, not necessarily to make frames, but he was, so that put him in touch with Roger, and they started their factory in what is now the Leela Kempinski in Bombay, huge sprawling grounds where chemical molding started its operations. And chemical moldings is what Chemould comes from, chemical molding. So that was the beginning of his stepping into, let's say, the outer boundaries of an art world, making frames. Quite a bit later, they started a frame shop at Princess Street, now legendary because it's been there for 70 years in one spot. And framing is what brought him to, introduced him to painters and to artists. Walter Langhammer walks into his framing shop, introduces young artists like Heber, like Raza, like Hussein, Souza, Ara, Bakre, the whole progressive artists, little chuttu boys, literally. They were very, very young children, really. And Langhammer was this larger-than-life father figure for them, and started introducing their pictures to my father and telling him how to frame these paintings. My father had no experience. They were framing calendars, photographs. So suddenly they were framing paintings, which was completely new to, what he was doing. I don't think they ever, they didn't have those kind of orders. And that was the beginning of him being introduced. And Chemould Frames became a kind of salon for painting. And it literally was other than the Artist Center, which of course has become historically probably the first center, Chemould Frames was probably the first little art gallery where these artists would be showing.
Yeah, I'm really interested to explore the context within which Chemould was operating in Bombay in the early period. And if I can just bring you forward to the early 60s when the gallery itself first opens in Jahangir Art Gallery, can you give us a sense of the landscape for modern, as it was then, contemporary art in Bombay? What was there a client base? Was there an interested viewership? What about the press and the media landscape? Were people interested in talking about art? Can you just give us a sense for Bombay in that early 60s period as the gallery first opened?
So I just wanted, so the framing shop leads to the Jahangir Art Gallery, Gallery Chemould. Almost 20, 25 years later. It wasn't immediate. So it was a huge incubation. And 10 years of that time, my father even stepped out completely from the art world. So it wasn't like he was entrenched in it. But but I think the bug had bitten him very badly. And because he was already fraternizing with people from the Bombay Art Society, I mean, which he was already the president of, so he was setting up societies. So I think by the time he became a gallerist and started Gallery Chemould, which was a completely new enterprise in 1963, I would expect that he especially would have already known art world people meaning, from apart from Rudy von Leyden, Schlesinger, Langhammer, being a sort of person in a certain society, operating out of a certain society in Bombay, knowing like a Jahangir Sabawala, for instance, and of course Kavasji Jahangir, who was the great patron, of art, music, the great Kavasji Jahangir Hall, which is now NGMA. So these were people that I would expect my father would have known and come into an art gallery not completely bewildered. I mean, not he would certainly have had that kind of backing, and having that kind of, I mean, in a sense, his 20 years would have privileged him. um, you know
Yeah.
And I guess Jahangir Sabawala, Bapsi Sabawala, very influential people. I'm thinking at that moment that it's probably such connections that leads him to a Homi Bhabha, for instance. Otherwise, how does Homi Bhabha get to know of an obscure gallery? There's no press telling you about, oh, there's a new gallery. There's no Instagram. There's no Bombay Times third page. Nothing. And I expect that Homi Bhabha would have been a busy man, and it would have been, people of influence that would have drawn him to this new gallery here. Uh, so the climate would have, I mean, my father never ever, and what you have spoken with him, and this question really brings me to the point that I he never spoke about, I mean, it was a pauper's business for sure, because my mother has written about it, pleadingly to say that there's no money, please come back, I don't know how to pay the rent.
Right.
But from my father's words, I don't remember this being a frugal time. For him, it was very, it was heady because of the kind of person he was, and probably drawing the kind of people. So I don't want to say it was like this kind of time where nobody bought paintings. Of course, nobody bought paintings. But I think it was a very, very interesting time for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Culturally, there was a lot going on in the city. There were people, and there was a milieu that he was operating within.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Shireen, I mean, because this is such a compressed conversation, I'm gonna have to again jump forward drastically. And you've obviously have been immersed in art your entire life. However, I'd love to know just a little bit about your more formal introduction into the art world, your apprenticeships, internships, education, which brought you more solidly within the art ecosystem. And then as a second part to this question, really, when you were aware and ready to take on a more active role within the gallery. So this is sort of a two-part question.
So I went to Sophia College in Bombay, literally by accident. I happened to do well in my 10th grade. I literally went across the road and registered. My mother had no idea. So everything in my life was very chance, like my father, as Behroze said, a bit of a chancer. I think actually my life was a bit of a chance as well. I went to a normal Bombay college, and by the 5th year, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But by then, because I was in town, I was, going to the gallery a lot. I mean, other than the fact that, I grew up with art and all of that, but there was this more informal engagement of helping my mother, who I was very, very, very attached to. And I know I really enjoyed that moment of sort of going into the back room, and she would be there and I would be hanging around. So by if you call it internship, I didn't know that word at the time, but I knew where all the paintings in those racks were before I went to formal education. So so I think my mother sensed that this was something that possibly I could do, because she didn't know what to do with me either. She didn't have any plans for me. And we came upon some money because the art gallery wasn't making enough money to send me abroad for education. But there was 50,000 rupees in that I'd inherited from an aunt, and somehow that came into my account. And so my mother said, there's 50,000 rupees and the fees are so much. And I mean, whatever it was, I don't remember. But that's literally the money that I had to spend that whole year. I didn't have more, or I couldn't have done more. So that's how we went. And I have siblings, and Behroze in London, and she wanted me, and she sort of said, I know this course. And so I think that year in London was, for me, actually much more of a year that I grew up.
Tell us what course it was, Shireen.
It's called Art Administration at the City University. It kind of led you to internships. I interned at the Whitechapel Gallery. I interned with a lovely gallery called Nigel Greenwood. That was Dhruva Mistri's gallery. I mean, I chose him because I knew Dhruva, and I thought, Indians showing there, let me go and So, but it was a wonderful experience of working with a guy called Anthony Wilkinson, who ended up being a gallerist now, quite a prominent London gallerist now. So, it was just, it was like immersed in a very specific contemporary art scene in a city where I didn't really know anybody other than my sister, and I was kind of getting to know her film friends. But it was very, very arty for me to be in London for that year. I wasn't doing other stuff. I was actually going to openings. I got to know people who would invite me. So it was like, and then Whitechapel really opened my doors to getting to know a whole lot of friends that I still have contact with. And so it was quite immersive. So I wasn't like, oh, this is not what I want to do. This is like, it became quite normal for me to be part of an arts ecosystem.
So Shireen, then coming back to India, when is it, and how, can you just lead us through the process by which your involvement with the gallery becomes more?
I think I keep, again, chance, again, privilege, call it whatever you want. But I came back on the 25th anniversary year, but 25th anniversary month almost, the end of term. And so.
What year are we in?
1988. And it was like, jumping into something that was a very, very ready, and there was something sort of something brewing, that big auction of Christie's.
Times of India? No.
Much later. But Christie's, I think, or Sotheby's, Helpage India, the first ever auction. So suddenly Hussain and Raza and so on go from 20,000 to 1 lakh to 2 lakhs. It was like a big moment, a big jump. And, moment money speaks, more and more people get interested,
Right.
So it was definitely a big jump in the audience. So from a moment where there was, sort of the kind of visitors, the kind of new entrants into the art world was certainly exponentially greater by the time I came.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of, again, a bit of a ready-made situation, but also a very heady situation because, we decided to redo the gallery. We had old chatai walls. It becomes painted walls. And the 25th anniversary exhibition, which my mother really put together, I don't say curated, but it had a span of artists, very interesting, but certainly not curated. There's no relationship between one. It was really artists that had worked with the galleries and artists that she had missed showing ever. So somebody like Jogen Chowdhury, who, for some reason or another never happened, the show. He was lovely body of work. I bring back two beautiful canvases by Ranbir Kaleka, like never seen before.
From London.
Ranbir nobody knew about, from
Wow.
London. He was in London at the time. So I rolled and brought it back.
Wow.
I mean, of course, a big introduction to Atul Dodia. You know, three large canvases in the entrance of the Jahangir Art Gallery where the exhibition was, you know, getting hugely noticed. He paints Bhupen Khakkar. So, you know, there's suddenly new relationships being formed. Bhupen barely knew Atul at the time. So there's this very interesting kind of dialogue happening, you know. Bhupen paints two very, very seminal works for our show. One is called Seva, and the other is called The Party, which is this kind of, you know, conglomeration of men sort of coming on one on the other and kind of a heap of men actually. So it was interesting in terms of the kind of work that was there. And let me tell you, it was 1988. Prices were reasonably high. We had a sellout exhibition. I don't think there was even one thing. Like we had people like Akhilesh and Yusuf, who were Raza proteges, you know, from Bhopal, from Bharat. Bharat Bhavan was bristling at the time. It was kind of very interesting, I think, if I go back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, absolutely sellout show. We had a wonderful Tayyab Mehta. You know, so yeah. It was,
and your role within that exhibition, you're now taking a lead.
So I was, my role was really just sitting there all day and really enjoying. Like I love going at 11 in the morning to be there. Kurush and I were kind of courting, so he would come, and the person that who was there all day, and Atul did that for all his shows. Atul and Anju, were they were there like from morning to as if they were like the guards of the gallery, you know. So it was the beginning of our friendship in that week, actually. Kurush, me, Atul, Anju. So yeah, so it was just me sort of taking the price risks around. I don't think I knew what to say about works. I don't remember being necessarily erudite about what each painting was about, or even whether people asked. I think people just asked for pricing, you know, and you kind of
yeah. And then can you just take us then through the 90s and into the early 2000s in terms of how you increasingly wanted to position the gallery, Chemould, and also, you know, in parallel, your parents are still working, they're still in. So could you just talk about, number one, how your vision for the gallery at that point, and number two, did you experience any pushback, not only from your parents, but also from the first wave of artists that were represented within the Chemould program, and how did you manage that?
So first exhibition that my mother completely gave me free rein on was Atul Dodia, when we repainted the gallery and we stripped it off. It took about 4 or 5 months.
Which year was this, Shireen?
1989.
This was 89.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a few exhibitions after the 25th. I remember Vivan and so on. So I was, you know, suddenly introduced to some of the artists that I now work with, but I didn't know really well. I didn't know much, but you know, from Atul onwards, there was like say you have a horse, and the horse is sort of more tightly reined by my mother. Then reins start getting a bit looser, you know, and I don't know that probably Atul was the absolute transition between one to the other, but uh, it just feels very, very seamless. You know, it feels it's non-eventful. You know, in terms of like, was I handling or was she handling? Or my father was always there, but he never looked into the nitty-gritty every day of the gallery. So so yeah, so basically, early 90s, we start, you know, it's the beginning of a big event. But late 80s, uh, there was already a kind of political uh, upheaval happening. There was this sort of transition between Rajiv Gandhi, VP Singh, but yet communalism coming in. It was a kind of period of strange transitions. All of us were very, very politically inclined, because I very, very clearly remember Mort in 1989 or maybe 1990. I don't remember the year, but Rajiv Gandhi was fighting elections, and we were so against him that we closed down the gallery and made it a center for collection. We were like, we don't want to bother with exhibitions, you know. And then my parents sent me off to Amethi to campaign for their friend Raj Mohan, who was standing against. So there was already, you understand that this is important to what leads on, which is 1991, 92, when the whole Babri Masjid thing happens in 92. It became a big shift, and by then embedded in the politics of India, that event really, really caught my imagination, as it did catch the imagination of all the artists I was working with across the board. And they were really my artists, So I was very, very close to Nalini Malani. I was very close to Pushpa. I was very close to Rumana. And these were the artists who were beginning to, Vivan Sundaram. These were the artists that were beginning to make that shift. So, and I'm not saying this is not early 90s, but this is going past that whole Babri event, when the art world begins to change color, when painting is no more the most, beloved thing. I mean, it was beloved very much, but certainly I was like so not interested at a moment, I was like, I was young, so I just thought it was super old-fashioned to be showing paintings, not knowing that painting never died. It was that, I mean, we all speak about that moment in history, it's become a turning point. Gita's exhibition at the Tate Modern becomes a seminal moment, which was really, I consider my moment, And
that's 2000, 2001.
That exhibition was, but she talks about the 90s, yeah?
Yes.
See, that exhibition is in 2001, but she talks about Bombay of the riots and
yes,
and that whole move, that whole shift. I mean, the question about how artists begin, and I'm showing, I am showing people like Raza, and I am showing people like Tayab, and
side by side.
Yeah, and I know that I had some very, very successful exhibitions by Raza. I think by 97, when I was very pregnant with my son, and he was so grateful for how involved I was in his exhibition. I know that we had a very successful show, but this is the time when the cash cow of the gallery, starts withdrawing because he thinks it's a load of shit, Pun not intended. We're showing Sheila Gowda, who's showing cow dung paintings, So it is kind of, it's a very, very interesting moment where mediums are like, and what do you think my parents are doing at this time? They're watching this, with kind of probably some kind of, interest, but never, I don't know that they really necessarily question me, or question it. Honestly, Mort, I don't remember whether we had arguments about these things. And really that takes you back to the fact that they were very open and open people that were always ready for change,
Yeah. So I'd like now to take us forward to 2007, another key moment in the history of Chemould, and that's the move from Jahangir Art Gallery to the new location at Chemould Prescott Road. And I'd like for you just to tell us about the impetus for that move, and also then take us forward in time again. And really, I'd like to get your thoughts about the internationalization of Chemould Prescott Road, and the reasons why you felt it was necessary to take the program to a global platform.
Yeah, I mean, we all lived through a certain moment of 2004 to 2007. and I was in a, a little egg of a gallery on the first floor of the Jahangir Art Gallery, always believing we were the center of the universe, which we were. Kala Ghoda was so much the center. Kala Ghoda Festival came and literally emerged around us. So we felt so secure in our little eggshell, and little hole, as I say, WHOLE in the wall. But I never really realizing, and I would have, people coming to me and say, so do you think that you want to change, expand? And I'm like, I have no idea what the word expand means, honestly, a few years earlier. And I thought, why should I expand? I have a wonderful space that everyone comes to. I don't need to go anywhere. And I mean, it was just very cottage industry-like at the time. And there was, and then comes 2004, online auction, Saffron Art, and the whole build-up of Bodhi Gallery coming into play. I mean, I didn't even know what competition meant until then, because there wasn't competition. I mean, my father had competition with Pandol Art Gallery, but I didn't really understand that till that happened. And literally the ground below our feet was being kind of, sort of slipping away. I could have lost every major artist I was showing and never had new ones coming to me. But still, we went on for a bit. I mean, I pulled it. I must say, I did pull it along from 2006, when I literally had to start announcing that, yeah, I'm looking for a new place. I'm looking for a new place, with no new place in sight, Not that I wasn't looking, but I had no idea what that would be, or what that would mean, or how large that would be. I couldn't build dreams because I didn't know what I was looking, what would finally emerge. But I think that period was so catapulting at such a high speed, with Mr. Amit Judge kind of creating a whole new environment for art, and doing things that we had never heard of, that really I thank him for that, and as much as grief I felt at the time, I'm also thankful. And there was no doubt that we had to then look for the best and the nicest possible space, and yes, and after much hunting, my husband Khorshed was a big support to me. We found Chemould Prescott Road, the space on the third floor. I always loved that road, by the way. It was strange because every time I would drive past that road, which you have to go to, I would always say, I wish I was here. I mean, I kid you not, I used to love the trees and love that road. And so it was I felt like, very, very happy that this was the place, even though it was the third floor. But I think that space is everything at that time. When you enter a new home, your things change. You begin to put things in different places. You begin to live life in a different way. If you're changing your kitchen, you start maybe changing the way you cook, So I think that this was kind of a very big shift in my head. And that shift also meant the first introduction, or the first invitation I got to Art Dubai, and I had never really in 2006 I had thought of Art Basel. We really wanted to, we didn't get in. But then we thought, wow, Art Dubai, good soft landing ground. It's not a big, it still feels like India. And that was our first fair. And I mean, like I would say, that was my first art fair. It certainly wasn't my first international foray into art, but certainly commercially.
I'd love to know, just why did you feel it was necessary for the program to be now put into a global onto a global platform? Why was that necessary to do at that time?
You will remember yourself that 2007, 6 to 7, 8, 2005 to 2007 was really, I mean, I had built up a stable of artists that I felt very, very confident about. I mean, I just felt like, wow, you know, each one spoke to the other. I was speaking to them, they were speaking to me, and the world was looking at them, you know. I really felt that, I mean, this was my time to make good or I will drown. And I really understood the importance of what I was doing, you know, and what I was, I mean, it was, you know, otherwise you amble along because you don't have enough feedback, you know, or so I think it was a real moment of reckoning for me to know that, yes, we are making something here. You know, I'm not saying we didn't do it and my parents didn't do it, but for me, that realization was very clear. You know, everything else in the 90s was all fun and games, you know. Here I was, you know, I said, oh, there's a potential to really do interesting things and make money, you know.
Right.
So,
Makes
yeah, so I thought, you know, this is a good time, and yeah, it was a sort of good global moment.
Yeah. So Shireen, I'm sorry, we are going to have to wrap up soon, but there's one more question I want to ask you, and it's probably the toughest question. And it's to do, since we are talking about legacy galleries, I'd like you to address the future of Chemould and what you would like to happen after your own professional career it winds down. And do you think about that? Is that important to you that the name Chemould Prescott Road continues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's such a tough question. I think about it all the time. We have a lot of conversations, what form this could possibly take, you know, whether it continues in this form, continues in, you know, steps into another form. You know, these are not questions that I'm going to put into place in the next years. Even it could take a long time, you know. I feel young, I feel very energetic, I feel very involved. I feel very different from what my mother was at the time. You know, I'm actually now older in the gallery than my mother and my father were running Gallery Chemould. So
Right.
I've actually now surpassed their time. You know, I've done, if you know, I came in on their 25th year, I've way past 25 years. So, but you know, at 25 years, my mother was much older. My father had very different interests. They felt very comfortable to hand it over. I'm not sure that I feel absolutely comfortable to give it over to my daughter. I don't know that her interest is as sort of, you know, secure or you know, as passionate at the moment, let's put a want of a word. But I can see that these things happen gradually. You know, I have two children. I have two children who are very involved with us as a family. So it could go in any way. So I absolutely see the future of the gallery continuing. And we think of different ways to kind of possibly take it. So I don't want to spell those ways out, but I definitely want to say that the gallery will exist in some form or another going further.
Well, thank you so much for that, Shireen. I really appreciate it.
You're not.